So these images aired on Iranian state TV, which they appear to show missiles being fired into the night sky. One target, Ain al-Assad base, that's in a sprawling rural area west of Baghdad. Another, Erbil in northern Iraq, also home to a base used by coalition forces, including Canadians. The full extent of the damage is still unclear, but the latest report suggests there are few, if any, casualties. What is clear? Iran is openly claiming responsibility. That puts Washington and Tehran in a dangerous standoff. We have full coverage tonight with Susan Ormiston in Washington tracking the U.S. response, Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on Canada's reaction and what we're hearing about those Canadian troops. But let's begin in the region. Margaret Evans is in Beirut, where this explosion of violence was dreaded and widely expected. So, Margaret, what do we know about tonight's attacks?
Adrian, Tehran has been threatening to retaliate against the United States for Qassem Soleimani's assassination, and to do so directly without relying on militia proxies like Hezbollah, for example, here in Lebanon. And tonight it seems that that is indeed what we're seeing. The grainy proof, or so it would seem, of what Iranian state television is dubbing Operation Martyr Soleimani. A series of surface-to-surface missiles hit an Iraqi base in Anbar province called Ain al-Assad, housing U.S. and other coalition troops. Another wave of missiles is said to have targeted the Kurdish capital of Erbil in northern Iraq, which also hosts a coalition base. Most of the Middle East has been bracing itself for just such an escalation in the wake of Qassem Soleimani's assassination last week. Tonight's missile barrage began just hours after the former Iranian general and spy master was buried in his hometown. Dozens of mourners were trampled to death when a stampede broke out in the huge crowds following the funeral procession. Also today, Iranian legislators passed a law labeling the U.S. Army and the Pentagon terrorist entities. And the country's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, repeated pledges to avenge Soleimani's death.
That's an act of war done in a cowardly terrorist operation, and Iran will take appropriate response to that.
Here in Beirut, in Hezbollah neighborhoods, giant billboards bearing Soleimani's image line the streets, a reminder of how far his reach extended and of the sectarian nature of the Middle East. The main question tonight, of course, is whether or not these strikes represent a definitive act of retaliation from Iran or just the start of it. Adrian.
All right, thanks, Margaret. Margaret Evans in Beirut tonight. So another key question is how Washington will respond. Susan Ormiston is there. And Susan, there has to be a flurry of activity still at this hour at the White House.
You bet. The lights are on at the White House. Security has been tightened around the building. The national advisors to the president have been huddling with him for hours. The Secretary of State and Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We've heard only one thing from President Trump tonight. Not surprisingly, a tweet. The president said, with a surprising tone perhaps, "All is well," double exclamation, "so far so good," and added that he will be making a statement to the country tomorrow. The Pentagon is assessing battle damage, and the main question, of course, Adrian, is what will the U.S. do next? The president has repeatedly said if attacked, it will respond forcefully. He said it again today. Here's how the day played out.
The United States is not seeking a war with Iran, but we are prepared to finish one.
The U.S. Defense Secretary earlier today clearly preparing Americans for what was to come.
We should expect that they will retaliate in some way, shape, or form. We're prepared for any contingency.
Team Trump was on deep defense today with top leaders, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Defense Secretary Mark Esper, and the president, all doubling down on the justification for killing Soleimani.
He's been called a monster. And he was a monster. And he's no longer a monster. He's dead.
But in death, Qassem Soleimani has remained a threat, a martyr in the eyes of his followers. In fact, tonight's operation was named Martyr Soleimani. U.S. allies, Canada included, are moving some troops out of Iraq. In a letter, Chief of Defense Staff General Vance said to ensure their safety and security. U.S. forces were already on high alert, but the government again denied today its troops would withdraw from Iraq. This retired military colonel says they should.
We are literally sitting in the desert defending ourselves like a turtle. That's the only thing we're doing. And by all rights, we should leave instead of just being targets.
Just over a year ago, President Trump made a surprise visit to the same Iraqi air base hit tonight during the December break. He has not publicly responded to tonight's attack, but earlier today repeated his warning to Iran.
If Iran does anything that they shouldn't be doing, they're going to be suffering the consequences, and very strongly.
Now, Adrian, one of the red lines for this president is dead or injured Americans. And there's no indication yet tonight that there have been American casualties, although Iraqis may have suffered some casualties on those bases. From Iran tonight, the foreign minister has tweeted that Iran does not seek escalation or a war, but will defend itself if it is attacked. An advisor to the Iranian president was harsher. He said that any adverse military attack by the U.S. will be met with an all-out war across the region. So we're all waiting tonight and into the wee hours of this morning to see what the U.S. will do next.
All right, Susan, thanks very much. Susan Ormiston in Washington. So now let's look at what this means for Canada. Power and Politics host Vashi Kapellos is with us. Vashi, we've heard from Canada's Chief of Defense Staff, Jonathan Vance. What is the official word on Canadian troops in the region?
The official word, thank goodness, Adrian, is that they are all accounted for and they are all safe. We found that out not long ago vis-a-vis a tweet from General Jonathan Vance. I just want to back up for a second before pulling up that tweet, though, and show you that General Vance, along with Minister Harjit Sajjan, was meeting at the Department of National Defense at the building I believe that you're looking at right now throughout the evening. The meeting wrapped not long ago, and it wrapped because General Vance came out with this tweet announcing the status of those about 500, up to 500 Canadian troops in Iraq. He said, CAF, Canadian Armed Forces families, I can assure you that all deployed CAF personnel are safe and accounted for following missile attacks in Iraq. We remain vigilant. Some of those troops had been moved out earlier today from Iraq to Kuwait, though we're not sure how many remained on the base in Erbil or around the base. That is, of course, one of the bases that was attacked by Iran earlier this evening.
So, Vashi, are we hearing anything else, perhaps from the Prime Minister tonight?
Nothing since the announcement that Canadian troops are safe, but we did hear from the Prime Minister a little earlier. A spokesperson for him told us that the Prime Minister has been informed of the situation and that we are monitoring it closely. There will be, I think it's fair to say, some tough questions for the Prime Minister tomorrow. I think a lot of Canadians, or at least the opposition parties, are demanding that he speak directly to Canadians about this. I think there will also be a lot of questions, not just for him, but for the military, about what they plan to do with the rest of the troops stationed, the Canadian troops stationed in Iraq. Will they be moving out to Kuwait, or will they be leaving the country? Is it just too unsafe for them right now, given the current tense situation?
All right, Vashi, thanks very much. That's Vashi in Ottawa tonight.